There was no one flipping burgers. All the grills were cold. Onion rings were in their bags. Fries were growing mold. There were no baristas at Starbucks asking how many shots would you like when all the minimum wage workers went on strike.
So welcome everyone. Thanks for coming out tonight to study, work, organize this event put together by Baristas Rise Up and the Canadian Federation of Students, and also part of the Radfrosh 2013 calendar. We're here today to discuss this rising movement of Baristas Rise Up. There have been these groups of baristas in various workplaces struggling to unionize at various places, and we're here today to discuss it as part of Radfrosh and with the Canadian Federation of Students to see how, in particular, the connection, the intersection between student interests and workers' interests in a new economy of precarious employment. So without further ado, I'll introduce our different speakers here tonight. First on my left is David, actually, what's your last?
Etherington.
Etherington, Dave Etherington. Welcome. Dave has been part of the student movement here in Nova Scotia for the last 6 years. He's been president of the King's Student Union and treasurer for the Canadian Federation of Students Nova Scotia. He's a founder of the student-run canteen at King's College called The Galley, and Dave is now the new Maritimes organizer for the CFS, the Canadian Federation of Students.
Congratulations.
Oh, thanks, Dave. Further down the line, on the left, always, is Shelby Kennedy. Shelby, and I've got her little write-up here that I'm just going to read because it's kind of awesome. Shelby has been a slinger of fine coffee brew since she was 14. She currently works at Second Cup on Quinpool and is tired of all the crap. She joined Baristas Rise Up this summer and is looking forward to making a barista community in Halifax. And furthest to the left is Shane Shuga, who's queer and trans food service worker and activist here in Halifax and a member of Baristas Rise Up. So welcome to this panel. Is there a particular order in which you'd like to speak? Anybody would like to go first, or I can just go down the line again, or maybe reverse order?
Maybe down the line?
Sure.
Okay.
So let's start with you, Dave.
Okay, well, I'll begin. I'd like to apologize, first of all, for reading my presentation off of my laptop. I meant to get this printed off at some point today, but a meeting I had right before this ran over. So hi, my name is David Etherington again. I'm the organizer in the Maritimes for the Canadian Federation of Students. The Canadian Federation of Students is a national student-run organization representing students from Newfoundland and Labrador all the way to British Columbia. We have about 600,000 members, again, from coast to coast. We're a grassroots-run organization, so all the campaigns we do, the services we deliver, the policy research, the positions we take are decided democratically by students who get together, again, from coast to coast. In my presentation today, I'm going to start off by giving sort of our standard presentation on the solidarity work we do between students and labor. And then I'm going to briefly discuss, I think, 3 myths that we face when we talk about higher education as a public good, and I hope that will inspire a great conversation about tactics around post-secondary education, and especially the relationship between considering post-secondary education a public good and the right to a safe workplace and a livable wage a public good. So the student and labor movement have a proud history together across the country. Here in Nova Scotia, in 2011, when the postal workers were picketing, students were out there with them shoulder to shoulder. Last fall, when the faculty union at NASCAD was considering going on strike, the Students' Union and the Canadian Federation of Students worked to send them letters of support, to lobby on behalf of the faculty to the administration. And also we taught our members why it was important to support the faculty, why it was important to support workers, and why it was important not to cross a picket line. The reason we do all that is because we believe that workers' rights are students' rights. and that workers have a right to dignity in their workplace, and students have a right to dignity in their education. And oftentimes, workers are students, and students are workers. So the work we do together and the obstacles we face are oftentimes the same, and we're much more successful at overcoming those obstacles when we are working, I guess, to get over them hand in hand. Other similarities our movements have is a strong commitment to democracy. Our student movement, the Canadian Federation of Student, is organized into locals that are all grassroots and student-run, very similar to the labor movement. We also have very similar stances on democracy in the workplace and democracy at our universities. Again, as students, we believe our universities would be more capable at providing quality education if they were run by students, staff, and faculty there. And I think a great example of actually the problem with our board system in our universities now, I think it's important to understand that oftentimes our university boards are dominated by bankers and corporate leaders, and oftentimes the exact same people that are sitting around corporate boards is at the University of King's College. We had a campus that was not fire safe. We had a campus that wasn't fire safe for over a decade, and that board didn't do anything to give students, faculty, and staff a safe campus until they were actually threatened by lawsuit by the fire marshal. So I think that speaks to the kind of people who are running our universities and actually the real and urgent need to change those board structures. I think the second thing, and I guess moving forward, I guess I'll talk about the big challenge that we face right now in PSC here in Nova Scotia, and that's a real push to privatize our university system, to take it away from the public and to give it to, essentially to hand over our research departments to corporations and to further hand over our boards to unelected appointed boards, remove student, staff, and faculty representation there. That's really concerning because even right now, when we see government legislation that guarantees student representation on our boards, that's in the University Act, there is still a lot of intimidation for those reps and for faculty and staff reps who go there. At NASCAD, we've seen that students have been tricked into leaving meetings when faculty salaries are being discussed. The argument being that students can't make informed decisions about the governance of their university. And we've also seen at King's a real push by that board to bring forward this idea of fiduciary responsibility. And of course, responsibility as a board member to your institution is important, but the problem is when the boards and the administrations bring it forward, they make this argument that board members have to be responsible to the university more so than students, faculty, and staff. And I think what's really problematic there is, what are the interests of the university if it's not the students, faculty, and staff? And I think that goes a long way to talking about what we're talking about when we talk about the privatization of our institutions. It's taking it away from the people, the students who study there, the workers who work there, and away from the benefits it provides to the public. Right now in Nova Scotia, we're talking a lot about conditional funding when we talk about the way we run our universities. And the argument behind conditional funding, or sort of the rhetoric around it, is that it will make them more publicly accountable. And it will make them more public, and the way sort of right now the government wants to achieve this here in Nova Scotia is by making them more publicly accountable, by making sure that people who get out, essentially that there are high employment rates immediately after graduation, and that university research is making a profit. And I think one thing that we're trying to do at the Canadian Federation of Students is, when we talk about public accountability, is not public accountability in the sense that our universities become profit-making machines, or that they innovate and they sort of, lay off staff to save money. It's that our universities become publicly accountable by serving the public, and that's through the publication of financial documents, and also by opening ourselves up to let the public in, and then by also offering affordable and accessible education to all Nova Scotians. Speaking more specifically, I guess, to students while they're working during their study, I think a very concerning thing right now is that we see that as tuition is going up, the quality of education actually seems to be going down. A reason for this being that as tuition goes up, students are feeling more and more pressure to work as they study. Currently, it's 48% of students in Canada work while they study, and 75% of those say it has a detrimental impact on their education. This is very troubling, of course, because if you are well, one, it costs so much. Ideally, you would expect people to get a quality education, but actually because it costs so much, it undermines that. At the same time, as we see tuition going up and forcing students to work more, which distracts them from their studies, we see that funding is being cut, and that's seeing the reduction of GA, or general assistant, and teacher assistant positions. For grad students, this is problematic because as an undergraduate, it means that your TA essentially is forced to mark more papers than they had before, along with yours, so it's not getting the attention it really should have. And then also very concerning for the grad student, one, because it's very hard actually now to get a general assistant or teacher assistant position, so that's very important for grad students for getting the teaching component of their degree, and also at the same time when they're forced to mark so many papers, they can't really develop those effective marking skills because there is such a mass, or I guess a massive work to do. Student debt is always a concern. Especially the effect it has on hollowing out rural communities. I think that's really, when we talk about youth unemployment, cuts to universities are problematic because, I mean, those are jobs, ideally, actually, that people would be getting. I think when we talk about cuts to universities, it's important to remember what we're really talking about is cuts to jobs. And especially when you look at the way the rural universities play in rural economies here in Nova Scotia. In Wolfville, Acadia University is 90% of the income in that community, and it supports that entire region. So I think it's very important to remember that cuts to universities depress rural economies, and oftentimes that is a huge impact on youth being able to remain in those communities. So moving forward, I think there are 3 myths about higher education that we really need to overcome to change the way we think about it. One is that universities are private institutions. Sort of the way universities like to talk about themselves is that they are private institutions that receive public funding. But this is not the case. Their charters come from the public, and they have a responsibility to the citizens of Nova Scotia, not to their boards, and they don't have a responsibility to make money for private enterprise through research. They're responsible to people, and I think it's important that people understand that these universities belong to them. The second myth I think we have to overcome is that a university degree gives more benefit to its holder rather than to society as general. A publication from the CCPA, Fairness Funding in Our Collective Future, found that although the O'Neill report, a report which is very informative for PSC policy here in Nova Scotia, cited the personal benefit of having a higher education degree to be $750,000, that number after income tax is actually much closer to $148,000. And that actually, if you really look at who's benefiting, university graduates are healthier, more environmentally conscious, they're better at learning and adapting existing skills, they're more efficient in the job market, and they're more likely to volunteer and be engaged civically. So actually the benefits really are to everyone around them, and to the communities that they're in. And then the final myth I think we really need to get over is that targeted assistant is more effective than universal assistant when it comes to making university affordable. One thing here is that universal assistant makes sense because if you do make more from a university degree, you pay it back through a progressive income tax. The second thing here is right now we're seeing a lot of very focused programs trying to help students who take on these enormous student debts. The debt cap is is a great example where your debt is capped at $28,000. We've spoken to the government and asked why don't we just have an upfront grant system? It would prevent the need of a debt cap. You wouldn't be building a student debt anyway if all of your provincial loans were grants. And the response we got back was that the government liked the debt cap because there was a 4-year condition that it would only apply to 4 years of university, and they wanted to encourage students to finish in 4 years. I think the real concern there is that's a behavioral modifier, right? They're using student assistance to essentially force students to act a certain way in the university. That only applies to students who need that assistance. So you start having a 2-tiered model where certain programs, I think the foundation year program is a great example, where if you do foundation year and then you want to go on and you do sciences, it can be very hard to do that in 4 years. So all of a sudden, that becomes a very difficult decision for someone to make about their education who is using student assistance. And really, if we are going to have behavioral modifiers in universities, they should be focused on how do we have the highest quality of education, and they should be applying to all students, not just those who are dependent on student assistance. And what we really need as well is we need things that deal with reducing debt rather than managing it. I think the Liberals' announcement recently about getting rid of interest on student loans is a great example. I mean, that will assist people in managing their student debt, but it won't do anything to actually get rid of that massive student debt. Like, that is the problem, and it's actually created through the government's policies. So I think by overcoming those three myths, you can start making a strong argument that education is a public good, that it belongs to everyone, and everyone has a right to it. And I think it's very important that we very aggressively try and educate the public on that, because there is such an effort, both from government, universities, and the private sector, to actually convince them of the opposite. And that's it.
Thanks, Dave. And actually, before we move on.
There was no one pumping gasoline, no one driving from town to town, no one at the register, all the highways were shut down. Cars were stuck in the garage, CEOs on bikes, when all the minimum wage workers went on strike.